A warm welcome to everyone to today's webinar on nuclear energy, climate change and sustainable development, developments in Europe. The moderator for today's session is Ms. Denise Cheong, Head of Nuclear Law and Policy at the Center for International Law, or CIL, NUS. Without further ado, we begin the webinar now. I hand over the floor to Ms. Cheong for her welcome remarks.
On behalf of the Center for International Law, a very warm welcome everyone to today's webinar, where our focus is on developments taking place in Europe. Each of nuclear energy, climate change, and sustainable development on its own covers a diverse range of topics and issues. But our aim today is to explore the nexus between the three areas. Starting first with the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, adopted by the United Nations in 2015, efforts to realize these goals by the year 2030 have been seriously impacted by the ongoing pandemic. As for climate change, with the report released by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC, earlier this year, the outlook is particularly sobering, even with a longer runway to 2050. Given that energy is at the heart of the climate challenge, and indeed many of the SDGs, this has intensified calls in many quarters for bold and urgent action to accelerate the clean energy transition. Indeed, countries are being challenged to build back better as they plan for post-pandemic recovery. Given nuclear energy's ability to generate baseload power and its low carbon credentials, what role can it play in response to rising energy needs, the climate crisis, and the global sustainable development agenda? In terms of the SDGs, apart from clear links between nuclear energy and SDG 7 on affordable and clean energy, and SDG 13 on climate action, its potential to contribute to many of the other SDGs has been advocated by international bodies, including the International Atomic Energy Agency, or the IAEA, and the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, or the UNECE. Several of the energy modeling scenarios from international bodies, such as the IPCC and the International Energy Agency, have relied on a significant contribution from nuclear energy, alongside renewables and carbon capture, utilization, and storage to meet emission targets by 2050. So it is within this context that we will begin by looking to the UNECE region to understand the policy-oriented work that is being done to explore the role nuclear energy can play in the quest for carbon neutrality and sustainable development. In this region, nuclear energy currently provides the largest contribution of low carbon electricity, and where nuclear capacity looks set to expand. Yet multiple challenges do stand in the way of nuclear energy playing a more prominent role in the clean energy transition. In today's webinar, we will focus on developments surrounding two such challenges. The first relates to financing, specifically whether nuclear energy should be included in sustainable financing initiatives and benefit from capital flows that will support its further development and contribute to sustainable development. In this regard, we will hear about developments related to nuclear energy's classification within the European Union's sustainable finance taxonomy. The second challenge relates to high-level waste, often flagged as a major impediment to the sustainability of nuclear energy. Yet developments taking place within Finland with respect to the construction of the world's first deep geological repository are being regarded by international experts as offering a safe and effective way forward. So to take us through all these developments, we're very privileged to have with us today three speakers. Our first speaker, King Lee, wears many hats, of which I will highlight only two. King is the Vice Chair of the UNECE Group of Experts on Cleaner Electricity Systems. He was also part of the group of international experts who contributed to 2 recent UNECE publications that examine the nuclear energy, climate change, and sustainable development nexus. As director of the Harmony Program at the World Nuclear Association, apart from the UNECE, King is also leading strategic cooperation with ASEAN. Our second speaker is Alina Teplinsky, a partner at Pillsbury, Winthrop Shaw Pittman. She is a leading member of the International Nuclear Projects and Hydrogens teams and Energy Industry Group Deputy Leader, focusing on international nuclear energy matters. Alina is based in Washington, DC, where it is 3 a.m. in the morning. So a very big thank you, Alina, for being here, notwithstanding the time difference. Our third and final speaker is Jari Makkonen, Senior Advisor at Posiva Solutions Oy, the entity responsible for constructing the world's first deep geological repository for the final disposal of spent nuclear fuel in Finland. Jari has international client advisory experience of more than 25 years with large enterprises and public organizations. So before I turn to our first presentation, just 2 quick housekeeping points, if I may. The CIL team has prepared a compilation of selected documents relevant to the topics being discussed today. This e-compilation will be shared towards the end of the webinar. As for questions for our speakers, please feel free to send them through the Q&A function, and we will do our best to answer these after all speakers have presented. So thank you everyone for your attention. Without further ado, King, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Denise. I'll share my slides. Yes. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon or good evening where you are. First, I'd like to thank you to National University of Singapore Centre for International Law for inviting me to speak at the event on nuclear energy. My name is King Lee, Director of Harmony Program at the World Nuclear Association. Today, I'm representing the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNECE, as the Vice Chair of the Group of Experts on Cleaner Electricity System. I'll be talking about nuclear energy development in the UNECE region, drawing on recent activities and projects on the role of nuclear energy to support climate change mitigation and UN sustainable development goals. The United Nations Economic Commission for Europe is one of 5 regional commissions of the United Nations. UNECE includes 56 member states in Europe, North America, Central Asia, and including Russia. Over 70 international professional organizations and other non-governmental organizations take part in UNECE activities. In particular, UNECE work on sustainable energy is designed to improve access to affordable and clean energy for all and help reduce greenhouse gas emission and carbon footprint of the energy sector in the region. It promotes international policy dialogue and cooperation amongst governments, energy industries, and other stakeholders. The focus is on energy efficiency, cleaner electricity production, renewable energy, coal mine methane, gas, classification of energy and mineral resource, reserve and resource, and energy security. A major program of UNECE sustainable energy is the Pathway to Sustainable Energy Project. The aim is to strengthen the capacity of ECE member states to help countries to develop, implement and track national sustainable energy policy to mitigate climate change and to contribute to sustainable development. Within the context of the pathway to sustainable energy project, UNEC initiated the carbon neutrality project, looking at pathway to net zero for the whole of the UNEC region. The graph can show some of the components of the carbon neutrality project. The project explores in deeper details of particular technologies like nuclear energy, carbon capture and storage, and hydrogen, together with renewable energy to meet net zero. The project will also look at, in terms of decarbonizing the hard to abate sector, like energy intensive industry, particularly for steelmaking, cement and chemical. The result of this project will contribute to the UN high-level dialogue to have taken place at the UN General Assembly. And this is the first time in the last 40 years where the General Assembly have discussed energy. And also the material will contribute to COP26, that will take place in the next couple of weeks, and also to engage with other UN institutions. In my presentation today, I will draw on some of this work of the carbon neutrality project. First, let's start with the staggering global challenge of climate change. To reach Paris Agreement ambition of 1.5 degree, the world will essentially have to get to net zero by about 2050. The UNEC emission gap report shows that fossil carbon dioxide emission from fossil fuel dominates the whole of greenhouse gas emission. And in 2000, it estimated CO2 emission reached a record of 38 gigaton CO2 equivalent in 2019. And the charts show the challenge ahead from where we are. The concern is that, but however, when you look at CO2 emission and energy data, CO2 emission is still rising, and the share of fossil global electricity generation have not significantly changed for the last 20 years. Not only from an electricity point of view, but from a global energy demand, the share of fossil fuel have largely remained the same for the last 20 years. And with fossil fuel providing just over 80% of the global energy demand. And in the middle chart, you look at the global electricity generation from fossil fuel in 2019 is higher than the total electricity generation in 2020. So that is the challenge ahead for the world. How do we provide sufficient energy for the world, yet reduce and effectively eliminate carbon greenhouse gas emission? Within this context, many people are looking into tackling the challenge of climate change and are looking at the pathway to reach Paris Agreement goal. Many studies show that nuclear is an important part of the future energy mix. For example, the recent IPCC report on global warming to reach the 1.5 degree goal show that in the representative scenario of middle of the road, nuclear will have to increase 6-fold by 2050, with a generating capacity of 2,043 gigawatts, representing 25% of the global electricity generation. Obviously, this is together with the significant increase in other forms of low carbon generation of wind and solar. Now moving back into the UNEC region. As I mentioned, as part of the UNEC carbon neutrality project, we prepare a brief on nuclear power and its role for climate change mitigation and helping countries to reach net zero. The brief provide an overview and cover the development of nuclear energy in the ECE regions, also cover nuclear technology and its application, and a number of other topics like economics, health, and environmental impacts. In the next few slides, I will draw on some of the results of this nuclear power brief. So where are we today regarding nuclear energy in the UNEC region? Currently, 20 member states within UNEC operate nuclear power plant. Nuclear energy provides 20% of the electricity generated. And more importantly, is the largest source of low carbon generation, providing 43% of low carbon electricity. However, fossil fuel still dominates and supplied over 50% of the electricity in generation. And nuclear energy provides the largest source of low carbon energy, electricity in many of the UNEC countries, as shown here. Perhaps the more well-known cases in France, it provides about 70%, but in a number of other member states, in Ukraine, Slovenia, Hungary, it provides nearly 50% of the electricity. Moving ahead, many UNEC countries have explicitly stated that nuclear energy will play an important role in reducing their national emission in the future. As of September 2021, 17 reactor units, nearly 20 gigawatts, are currently under construction in 9 ECE countries. A further 118 reactors are planned or proposed by 19 ECE countries. However, these currently planned reactors will not be enough to meet Paris Agreement goal. Further low carbon energy sources are required, including more nuclear energy. Looking into how nuclear energy play its role, this diagram provides perhaps an overview. There are a wide range of nuclear reactor technology, consists of large-scale reactors that perhaps people more familiar with, then what we called small modular reactors, and micro reactors. Large-scale reactors are mature technologies that are commercially available today, whereas SMR and micro reactors are under development, with some SMR being deployed now. Also, nuclear power can have a wide range of application. In addition to the electricity generation, nuclear energy can provide solutions to an even wider range. So, for example, advanced nuclear reactors can provide high temperature up to 950 degrees C and as a source of process heat for industrial application. And nuclear energy can provide district heating. Russia and several Eastern European countries, Switzerland and Sweden, all have had nuclear fuel district heating scheme. Nuclear energy is also an efficient energy source for the production of hydrogen. Here's just some example of advanced nuclear reactors that are under development in the ECE region and elsewhere. In US, NuScale SMR received regulatory design approval and plan to build multiple units in a power plant to be located in the US Department of Energy Idaho National Lab site. The first floating nuclear power plant have started commercial operation last year and providing combined heat and power to remote communities. Rosatom just announced that they are planning to construct additional floating power plants. And China have just fueled and are due to start their high temperature gas cooled reactor. And with providing high temperature heat, this type of reactor has the potential to directly replace fossil fuel plants for industrial heat application. In UK, Rolls-Royce have received funding from the UK government to support their SMR development program. In addition, a number of countries in Europe are looking to deploy SMR, that's including France, Poland, and Finland. I'll just briefly mention about cost. Nuclear energy is cost effective, and this is illustrated in the diagram on the left-hand side, as illustrated by a recent study by the IEA and jointly with the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency. And this is also perhaps, as a further example, illustrated by the use of nuclear energy in Asia, countries like China, Korea, and Japan. However, nuclear energy is capital intensive as a major infrastructure project, and its high capital cost is a challenge, and that perhaps leading to the issue regarding financing and the importance of taxonomy that Elena will talk about later. But however, once it's built, it provides long-term low-cost energy. Perhaps I'll quickly move to a couple of other slides. I mentioned about life cycle assessment. This slide shows that nuclear power greenhouse gas emission is estimated at 6.3 gram CO2 per kilowatt. It's the lowest of all energy source from a study we have made. It's worthwhile reminding that all forms of energy production pose risks and cause health and environmental impact. Nuclear power has much lower health impact than fossil fuel and is comparable with renewable energy source. Our study, which is due to publish in shortly, I'm presenting, show the preliminary result here. It's very much consistent with the UN Joint Research Centre technical assessment of nuclear energy as part of the EU taxonomy. Quickly talk about sustainable development, nuclear energy contribution to sustainable. Nuclear energy is not only providing clean energy, but nuclear energy is an indispensable tool for achieving global sustainable development agenda. It has a key role in playing to decarbonizing the energy sector, but also attaining all sustainable development goals. We recently have produced a report and highlighting its nuclear energy contribution to the UN Sustainable Development Goals in this report. I just draw on perhaps some of the UN nuclear power energy and technology sustainable development goals. For example, nuclear technology helped to fight against pests and avoid the need to resort to harmful pesticide. And fresh food can last longer if it radiated and also kill bacteria. 40 million nuclear medicines procedures are performed each year, with nuclear medicine as a critical component in diagnosing health problems and providing treatments. Nuclear is supporting clean water and can provide desalination of seawater from nuclear reactor. Also, nuclear technology can help to trace and measure the extent of underground water and improve the management and conservation of water sources. Perhaps I'll highlight one important aspect is the role of nuclear to provide well-paid, high-skilled jobs and investment that support local community. As an example, in the current nuclear project in UK, is providing 20,000 jobs in Britain at the moment, and it's estimated it will provide 71,000 jobs throughout the lifetime of the project. They have trained 800 apprentices so far, and it would generated £3.2 billion on local companies in the local regions, and it will provide contribute 64% of the value of the project will go towards UK's company. I'll say last slide, key takeaway. Nuclear energy is an important source of low carbon electricity and heat and contribute to attaining carbon neutrality. It's important that all low carbon technology are required to transition to a low carbon economy. Nuclear is an important part of the future clean energy mix. Nuclear have much lower health and environmental impact than fossil fuel and is comparable renewable energy technology. And as I mentioned, nuclear energy is an indispensable tool for achieving the sustainable development goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, King, for that very helpful overview. Clearly, a lot of work has been done within the UNECE to better understand the role that nuclear energy can play in decarbonizing the energy sector, but also in the area of sustainable development. I will now invite Alina to take us through developments on the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy and share her views on the implications it has for nuclear. Alina.
Thank you so much, Denise, and thank you very much to CIL for the opportunity to participate in this excellent session. So King has made a very strong and powerful argument for why nuclear energy is sustainable and should be considered to be a key agent of climate change. The question is, why has the inclusion of nuclear energy in taxonomies had been controversial? And I'm going to go through specifically the EU Taxonomy Regulation and how nuclear energy has been considered as part of this, as well as discuss the implications of the taxonomy, and not just on the EU, but global climate change goals. So the EU Taxonomy Regulation has been in the news quite a lot, I think, in the past 2 years. It's important to understand what its objectives are. The EU has its Green Deal objectives, basically deep decarbonization, really by 2030, and then even deeper goals by 2050. So the objective of the regulation and the taxonomy at large is to channel both public and private finance to sustainable activities to basically facilitate those Green Deal goals. The taxonomy, it's supposed to be a classification system, and in my mind, it's much more complicated than it needs to be. It's written by lawyers for lawyers and perhaps accountants, but it sets out a really complex web of requirements. But if you really break it down, there are 4 criteria that an economic activity must meet to qualify as sustainable. One, it has to contribute substantially to one of the 6 environmental objectives that are set out in Article 9 of the regulation, and you can see them here on your screen, so I won't repeat them. But these are the typical environmental objectives that most taxonomies would look at. It has also this criteria of do no significant harm to any of these objectives or any other environmental objectives that are set out in the regulation. Has to be carried out in compliance with social safeguards, and also it has to comply with technical screening criteria. And the way that the taxonomy is set out is that you have this fairly broad regulation, and then under that regulation, you've got these delegated acts that are issued that actually classify the various activities. So the main end users that are going to be affected by the taxonomy are really companies. Large companies and companies listed in the stock market are subject to what is known as the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And this is basically in order to avoid greenwashing, right? To have large companies, the Fortune 500, be able to declare activities as green or sustainable when they're in fact not. So this is a reporting mechanism that basically requires companies that fall within these sets of criteria to report their activities as aligned or not aligned with the taxonomy, as sustainable or unsustainable. There's also the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, and that applies to financial market participants, which goes to all sorts of investors, from pension funds to insurance companies, as well as financial advisors. So, it really impacts what your average investor, your average person investing, in the stock market, for example, or in other assets, may be investing into, because the financial advisors also have to provide certain disclosures. And of course, what's not on this chart, but is basically implied that the taxonomy will have an implication for governments setting their policies with respect to decarbonization and energy transition. This is a very complicated process, as I mentioned. The taxonomy regulation was basically agreed, the language of it was agreed in 2019. And then you've got a set of milestones that follow through the next couple of years, various delegated acts on different environmental objectives. So climate change and mitigation and adaptation had to be issued by the end of last year. And then you've got other environmental objectives by the end of this year, and further ones going forward. And different parts of the regulation basically issued as we go. And the EC has made it clear that this is not supposed to be so one size fits all regulation where it's issued once and it's no longer adapted. It's supposed to be constantly adapted to new economic activities, to new economic criteria, and to technology development as well. So nuclear has been, a bit controversial, I think in many minds unnecessarily so, for inclusion in a taxonomy. And what's basically happened is that the regulation itself, as I mentioned, is high level. As part of that, there was a technical experts group, TG, that was set up. And when the EC says technical, they really mean these are financial experts. These are not experts, they don't in scientific principles. They're not experts in nuclear energy, for example. And this group was supposed to come up with recommendations of certain classifications. It was unable to do that for nuclear energy, and it referred, because it was unable to make a recommendation with respect to the do no significant harm aspect, which is one of those conditions that I mentioned. So this group referred that technical aspect to the Joint Research Center, which had a report that was issued in March. That report has to be reviewed by two groups in accordance, two other scientific groups in accordance with the regulation. But in the meantime, there was sort of an initial delegated act issued. So I'm going to go through this just one by one because it's complicated and multi-step. So let's talk about the Joint Research Center report. The JRC is a technical body. They issued this report that is very comprehensive, very lengthy, about 400 pages long. And the main takeaway from this report is that they concluded that nuclear energy meets the do no significant harm criterion. So nuclear energy should be included in a taxonomy. And the reasons for that are the following. One, they've determined that there's really no science-based evidence that nuclear energy does more harm to the environment and human health than other sustainable electricity production technologies, such as renewables and such as hydropower. In fact, the JRC determined that nuclear energy can actually be more sustainable than certain types of renewables. The question of waste that Yara is going to talk about what is going on in Finland, but the question of waste was determined to be really not a technical issue. The fact that there are geological repositories being developed, and the fact that EU is, has a strategy around that geologic depository model, as well as other technical options that are available, was basically determined to be, a safe bet from an environmental perspective by the JRC. So the JRC in March of this year issued this very positive report, which was, supported not just by the nuclear industry, but by a significant part of the environmental community that sees nuclear energy as a key agent of decarbonization. So this happened in March, and as I mentioned earlier, based on the regulation, the report had to be reviewed by 2 other scientific bodies. Before that could have been completed in April 2020, the EC decided to go ahead with the first Delegated Act. And the Delegated Act, once again, they are basically classifications of activities. They list activities as either sustainable. There's also a classification of transitional and enabling as well. So transitional ones are activities that may not be as sustainable as ones that are classified as sustainable, but do not do significant harm and are basically necessary as part of energy transition. So a panoply of activities was set out, including energy, manufacturing, transport. Nuclear energy was not addressed. And in a summary, in a press release that the EC issued, they noted that nuclear energy, along with natural gas, was going to be addressed by a complementary delegated act or more than one act at a later time. And it was not really clear. I think a lot of people read it differently. Some people read it as nuclear energy will be included in the taxonomy, and other people read it that nuclear energy may be included in the taxonomy, depending on both scientific and scientific reviews as well as political factors. So why are we talking about political factors here when this is really supposed to be a science-based assessment? Unfortunately, this has become a really big political issue, despite the fact that that is not how the taxonomy regulation is drafted. So you have 2 groups of countries, 2 main groups of countries, and then maybe a 3rd group of countries in the European Union. You've got countries that are firmly against nuclear energy in all ways, and that would be Germany and Austria and Luxembourg. Countries like Spain are also trying to phase out nuclear energy, and you've got some other supporters in that group. But it's a fairly small group, but of course it's led by Germany, which is very powerful and has a lot of pull in the EC. That group of 5 states that I mentioned sent a letter asking for the EC to exclude nuclear energy from the taxonomy. The other group that is very pro is actually a group of 10 countries. that have formally expressed support for the inclusion of nuclear energy in the taxonomy. And you can see these are in green here. This is the group led by France. And then most of Central and Eastern Europe, along with Finland, importantly, supports nuclear energy. And these countries have been very vocal about the need to include nuclear energy in the taxonomy. Then there are all of these other countries that are in yellow. And many of these countries are actually generally supportive of nuclear energy. They haven't necessarily voiced a formal opinion. Estonia, one of the ministers came out last week saying that they were actively looking at nuclear energy and may support it. Sweden actually has a very, very vibrant and thriving nuclear industry, but currently the government that is in power is not very supportive of nuclear energy, so they have not come out in support. You've got countries like Netherlands that haven't historically been huge supporters of nuclear, but they're looking at small modular reactors. And then you've got other countries that are, generally anti-nuclear, like Italy, for example, and Ireland, but are maybe starting to warm up to nuclear energy and understanding that it's, you need all technologies that are sustainable and clean to meet climate change goals. So that's the political part. Now let's look at the two scientific reports. So you've got these two groups, the Euratom Article 31 group and the SHEAR group. These groups were not responsible for developing their own reports. They had to review the JRC report. So the Article 31 experts group is a group of independent radiation protection and public health experts. And they basically concluded that the JRC report was comprehensive, that there is adequate legislation in the EU through the Euratom Treaty that protects humans against harmful effects of radiation, and also that deep geological repositories, which Yara is going to talk about, are safe and appropriate to store spent fuel. So this report focused on the radiation protection aspects of nuclear energy, was positive and supported the JRC report conclusions. The SHEAR group, which is a group that provides opinions, and opinions are capitalized because they are the formally issued opinions on questions about health, environmental, and emerging risks, generally supported the report, saying that the conclusions were comprehensive and they were appropriate. They did make a differentiation, which I honestly, as even as an attorney, had trouble understanding, that do no significant harm is not the same as do less harm. So what they were basically saying is that you shouldn't compare nuclear energy to renewables or to other economic activities, that you should review nuclear energy by itself in its environmental impacts. Which is a bit strange, because you have to have some sort of a parameter, because every economic activity, of course, has some environmental impact. It's impossible to have zero impact. So if you can compare nuclear against other activities, to me, it's very difficult to be able to evaluate this, but this was basically their conclusion, and they thought that the GRC, despite writing a 400-page report, did not discuss the impact of radiation enough. Although the group, the Article 31 group, which is focused on radiation impacts, did not feel the same way. So the SHEAR report a bit more critical than the Article 31 report, but overall, fairly supportive. So now, really, what do? We have all the scientific parts covered, and we really need to now focus on the politics, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the European Commission and the European Parliament that's going to make a decision on whether to include nuclear or exclude nuclear from from the taxonomy. And basically, it's come down to a battle between France and Germany, France leading the pro-coalition and Germany leading the anti-coalition. The German election just happened, and I'll talk about that in a second. France has really doubled down on nuclear energy. Nuclear energy already provides more than 70% of electricity in France. And France has, just announced, President Macron just announced last week a 30 billion euro investment plan to ramp up heavy industry and tech innovation, and includes specifically small modular reactors, $1 billion for that, as well as hydrogen production, which also can be produced through nuclear, and that has been stated by the Macron administration. So France is really going to bat for nuclear energy and betting its clean energy future on nuclear in large part. Now, what's going on with the German election? We could talk about that probably for hours. And this is just a slide showing you all the different parties that were competing in the election. And the column to look at is the one on stance on energy and climate change. Unfortunately, almost every party, with exception of the Alternative for Germany, which is far-right party, is anti-nuclear in Germany. It's just a matter of how much. The Greens, for example, want to end all support to nuclear power globally, whereas some of the sort of more center parties are more focused on Germany and perhaps some of the neighboring countries. What's happened in Germany is that Merkel's coalition basically lost their majority of seats, and the coalitions that were in place before, basically were unable to achieve their same results. So it throws everything into uncertainty, and basically we now have some smaller parties that will be kingmakers, including the Greens, unfortunately, which are very anti-nuclear, but also another party that's more centrist. So basically, we won't know the results of the German election probably until January of next year. The likelihood is that we're not going to have as strong of a German leadership role as we have, which may be a chance for France, which has the seat of the EU next year. Germany has not had a positive overall experience with its energy transition policy, despite trying to heavily rely on renewables. The carbon emissions in Germany have actually gone up, despite the fact that Germany has deployed a very large amount of renewables and has been successful with that strategy. And part of that is because Germany has started out and is almost done phasing out nuclear power. So what happens, is nuclear energy going to be included in the taxonomy or is it not? Hopefully it will be. But what is the impact on nuclear energy and on sustainability generally? So as I mentioned, of course, this has an impact on national policy. As governments are looking at their sustainable strategies and their green deals or their clean energy strategies, whatever you call them, if the taxonomy in the EU excludes nuclear, this could have an impact on some countries that are sort of in a yellow zone, right, where they're not hugely supportive, but they're also not against. It may not have any impact on countries that are already either expressing strong support for nuclear or are not, like Germany. It definitely will impact financial players. And it's not just the direct financial players who are investing in nuclear, but it's pretty much anyone who may be investing into companies that rely on electricity from nuclear, or companies that produce products, if we're talking about hydrogen production from nuclear. So this is, basically any type of investor from large companies that have the reporting obligation, but also I mentioned that financial advisors are also impacted by this and have to report. So this really could indirectly affect, your average investor, also your average consumer. If there's a certificate of origin and consumers are trying to buy products that are green or they're sustainable and nuclear is not included, this could have an indirect impact on nuclear energy, and therefore, if we need nuclear energy to be part of deep decarbonization, which I believe we do, that would have a negative impact. And importantly, the EU, of course, is seen as a model by many countries that are in the process of developing their taxonomies. However, we're already seeing some countries make a very clear choice that they want to include nuclear, and that includes Russia. It includes China, that's got two different taxonomies issued to national banks. And you've got countries, for example, like Bangladesh, that are not, that are staying technology neutral, that have more general guidelines that address environmental impacts, but basically are looking at any technology that is sustainable and that is net zero. One exception is the UK, which has a green financing framework that's a lot more narrow than the EU. And they simply didn't include nuclear because they said that some of their financial institutions do not finance nuclear, so they didn't think was appropriate. However, they did say that the government recognizes all net zero technologies. So that's the taxonomy in 20 minutes. I hope it was helpful, and happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Thanks very much, Alina, for that very clear overview of a rather complex area. So it's interesting to note that both the JRC and the Article 31 group of experts recognize, as you say, deep geological repositories as a safe and appropriate way to isolate spent fuel and other high-level waste. So to tell us more about this form of waste disposal, I will hand the floor over to Jari to share with us the Finnish experience. Jari, the time is yours.
Thank you, Dennis. Just a shit. Okay. Good, very early morning, Washington, D.C., and good afternoon, Singapore. It's very exciting to participate in this webinar, and we are always very honored to share the latest news from our Finnish program, where finally, after decades-long discussion within the industry of this final disposal, Posiva will provide a solution to close this very final part of the entire fuel cycle, i.e. the final disposal. First of all, I spend a minute in introducing you the Posiva as a company who has a mission, which is safe and cost-efficient final disposal of spent nuclear fuel for its owners, which are two private companies, both of them being public listed companies, having a certain touch point to Elina's presentation, Teollisuuden Voima and Fortum. Today, Posiva employs 90 own people, and in addition to them, even 100 external person years we do purchase from the outside market to consult also us further in certain niche areas of expertise, which we don't have in-house, but it's more or wiser to purchase such expertise outside. And right now, as we are just finalizing our construction works, both in underground area, but also in above ground area, where we are currently constructing the encapsulation plant, we are employing even up to 150 construction workers. Last year, Posiva's turnover was 113 million euros. Posiva is a non-profit organization, so performing on a cost basis. So that's why we are publishing only the turnover. And Posiva's subsidiary is Posiva Solutions, which just last summer had its 5 years anniversary. And the role of Posiva Solutions is to sell this expertise that is accumulated in Posiva over recent decades. And Posiva Solutions' role, which is, by the way, my employer, is to help other nations using nuclear as their source of energy to solve the same thing that is now done or will be done in the very near-term future here in Finland to do the same. Our clients are the national waste management organizations in entire world, meaning in practice roughly 30 countries in addition to Finland. This picture illustrates the overall journey of Posivas, which actually started already from early 1980s, when site investigations for hosting a deep geological repository started by Teollisuuden Voima. When 1994, the Finnish parliament stipulated a law preventing export and import of spent nuclear fuel. Also, the other nuclear power plant operator in Finland, Fortum, which was mentioned in the previous page, joined the final disposal project, and a special company, Posiva, was established for the purpose by 1995. The first objectives of the company were to prepare an application for a political decision in principle for geological final disposal of spent nuclear fuel, and to find a suitable site for the final disposal facility. The site was selected in 1999. I'm going to tell a little bit more about the site selection process in the next page. And the project was approved by the municipality of Eurajoki. After that, the decision principle was made by the Finnish government and ratified by the parliament in 2001. The decision in principle included a requirement that the preliminary site investigations made above ground shall be confirmed by site investigations in the actual disposal depth. This was why Onkalo, as we call it, the underground research and rock characterization facility, was constructed between 2004 to 2016. And the Onkalo has all the time been constructed under supervision of the National Nuclear Safety Authority, because from the early planning phase, it has been designed to be the part of the final disposal facility for the spent fuel. So this picture illustrates three main phases of Posiva. The blue part of it on the left-hand side of the tube, if we may call that like that, illustrates the planning phase of our all operations, including the site selection phase. The black part in between is the construction phase. And then the copper part from 2025 up to 2120 illustrates the operational phase, when we are then doing the industrialized disposal of spent nuclear fuel. One very important milestone there is still to be mentioned is this year, because by the end of this year, Posiva aims to submit the application for the operating license of the deep geological repository. And in here, just shortly to define and describe how the site selection process proceeded in Finland, as it started 1983, and initially we had even up to 102 potential candidate sites in Finland. Finland is a very suitable from the bedrock perspective for deep geological repository, because our bedrock is very, very coherent from south to north, from west to east. And we don't have that kind of seismicity as is in other parts of world. So from those perspectives, very, very potential country overall for final deep geological repository. As the site selection program proceeded, the number of sites was narrowed down to 6, where there were more detailed site studies carried out. And again, as the program proceeded, then there were 4 final disposal sites. And as a very final part, there were only 2 left, which were Eurajoki and Loviisa. Surprisingly enough, both of them are our current nuclear power plant sites. And after we have been reviewing that why these 2 cities were so favorable for the DGR, was most likely because of the public attitude. They have already recognized that how safely these nuclear power plants in these cities were managed and operated. So that was a very, very favorable thing to advance the discussion to cover also if the potential DGR, deep geological repository, would be located in either of these cities. And finally, Eurajoki was accepting the DGR to be constructed on its own area. This picture illustrates the extensive network of different stakeholders, together with whom a DGR operator, in the Finnish case Posiva, must have a continuous interaction with. So without going these through one by one, I would like to address the few most important ones. And of course, they are most likely the most important one to talk with is the public, and to gain the public acceptance in the local municipality. And that is something where already from the beginning of 1980s, Teollisuuden Voima put a lot of effort to do that in the best possible manner. And the best possible manner means in this field that we are open, we are honest, we are transparent in communication, whatever that is around nuclear. And that was and has been done very, very well, because as we saw also from Elina's presentation, that in Finland, the overall attitude on nuclear energy as a whole is green. So even the Green Party in Finland is favorable to advance the operation of our nuclear power plants as long as possible in order to fight against the climate change. So that has been done very, very well in Finland. Of course, the relations to media must be also carried out in a professional manner, because as we all know that there may pop up certain type of discussions, and especially during nowadays when there is social media in place, and a lot of can happen only in a very short period of time. So therefore, management and having good relations to media, including social part of it, must be done very, very well. And then, of course, a seamless cooperation together with the national authorities. In Finland, we have a very good experience on that. So our cooperation together with the National Safety Authority has been very, very good over the recent decades, and it has been very respectful. It has been communication on both directions, and that's one thing also which has been done pretty well here in Finland. So as a whole, this is a network of different stakeholders which must be managed year after year in a good manner to be successful in advancing the own DGR program nationally. So once the decision it was allowed to start to construct the DGR, these were the most important things that were mentioned in the Finnish Parliament to be the underlying things to accept the program. So first of all, it was considered that the final disposal made in Finland is truly a better solution than just continuing to resort the waste in interim storages. Secondly, as technologies develop over time, there must be an option all the time for the retrievability of waste canisters from the below ground facility. And probably the most important thing was that we want to carry the responsibility. The responsibility of this generation who actually has produced the high-level radioactive waste, that we carry the responsibility and start to construct the final disposal facility, and will also lead the program in a way that there will be a year in the near-term future that we will really start to dispose the high-level radioactive waste in a safe and a sustainable manner. So what is safety in the final disposal all about? So first of all, the final disposal concept in Olkiluoto made by Posiva, which is called so-called KPS3 concept, pretty much developed together with our Swedish colleagues in Sweden, consists of crystalline bedrock as the natural barrier, and then of an engineered barrier system. The engineered barrier system components in the concept are a disposal canister, can be seen here as a whole. This is a copper cast iron canister, a bentonite buffer, which is there in the disposal shaft surrounding this canister, a backfill of the deposition tunnels. This is the deposition tunnel, and there is a backfill, a deposition tunnel plug, and a closure of other underground openings in the final disposal facility. And on top of everything, there is a bedrock over 400 meters above of this final disposal facility. So there are four different components in this entire system, really to prevent that the radionuclides will stay there where they even should stay over the thousands of years to come. And how to ensure the safety for the next thousands of years to come, even up to 100,000 years, which is our safety case period. And by the way, if you do not yet know, within a period of 30,000 years from here to the future, there will be another ice age, at least here in the Nordics. So meaning in practice that we need to also take that into account while we are preparing our safety case. That considering Finland, our estimate says that there will be something like 2.5 kilometers thick ice on top of entire Finland. And our safety case says that the repository has been designed to manage even a 4 kilometers thick ice on top of the surface without any changes in the repository, as once it has been closed thousands of years before. But all in all, the safety case has been developed during the planning phase, and we are updating the safety case on a regular basis. So this is an iterative process without going into details in this picture, but it's an iterative process where certain requirements are naturally taken into account, surroundings are taken into account, and all that data is taken to safety, and then the safety case has been developed based on those. And that has been naturally then accepted and approved by the National Safety Authority. So once we are in the operation phase, which will happen in 2025, the safety case will be updated every 15 years to meet the requirements at that point of time. So then how our Onkalo, the research site, will look like from now on. So we have been constructing, which was said already in the previous pages, the Onkalo since 2004. It was pretty much finalized the R&D phase 2016. And now we are continuing to make it operation ready. In this picture, what is worth of mentioning that just last May, we started to excavate the final disposal tunnels, which are shown here in red. And there will be 5 of them. And then year by year, the excavations proceeds, and then we will start the final disposal. And every year, roughly speaking, 1 tunnel will be fulfilled with disposal material or material to be disposed and closed. So that is roughly the schedule for the next 100 years. And how will our facility look in 2021? So without going all these numbers through in here, you can read them also by yourselves. But our facility has been sized to take in or dispose all the already naturally existing rad waste from the operating nuclear power plants, 4 of them nowadays in Finland, and of course the wastes still to come over the next roughly 40 years, because we are right now in a very near-term future going to commission the 5th reactor in the Finnish network. So once that the plant operation time for that nuclear power plant is 60 years. So after the fuel has been cooled down, so then also those fuels will be disposed in the disposal facility. And then somewhere in 21-20, we will close the entire facility and put everything into the natural stage again. So just in a very short period of time, in other words, in 2 years, by 2023, Posiva will carry out something very, very unique in the entire world. And that is the so-called trial run of final disposal, which in practice means that we are going to test the entire process of final disposal from interim storage to the underground area. This picture on the top of the page illustrates our encapsulation plant, which is right now under construction and will be ready by next summer. And here we have some illustration of the machinery that will be used in the disposal in the below ground area, how to fill the machine to fulfill the disposal tunnels. And in this test, like I said, we are going to test the entire process from interim storage through the encapsulation plant, where the fuel rods will be put in the copper canister, hoisted down to the below ground area, taken together with the special vehicle to the disposal tunnel and disposed to the disposal shaft. The only difference to the operation phase commencing on 25 is that in this test we are not going to use the true fuel rods, but so-called dummy fuel rods. But everything else will be done as it will be done in a concrete operational phase, meaning that the process, the machinery, the personnel, which will run the facility, will run this test. And as a final note, just a year ago, November 2020, we hosted a very special guest. In other words, Director General of International Atomic Energy Agency, Mr. Grossi. He visited Onkalo, and just consider how excited he was. To me, it felt that it was more like a kid in a toy store when he went down there. And as most of us know that who is following this industry, that Mr. Grossi is very active in social media. He's continuously tweeting what he's doing and walking the talk around the nuclear energy. It was so nice to follow that he was also tweeting from Onkalo, where we do also have a Wi-Fi, that this is a true game changer, what the people of Posiva has been doing. And everything that has been discussed in this industry, how to solve the last question, how to close the last mile of this entire fuel cycle, i.e. the final disposal, will be materialized there in Onkalo. And that was something very nice also for the Posiva personnel, really to be to show that Posiva people are doing very meaningful and important work for the entire world.
Thank you very much.
That's all in short, and there will be also a video illustrating this visit of Mr. Grossi, which you can see also after this presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Jari. So the video that Jari's referred to is now on the chat. So if you're interested, the link is there. Thank you very much, Jari, for a very engaging presentation. Given the size of the undertaking and the timescale involved, it's really quite hard to imagine that this will soon, very soon, be a reality for Finland. So the first question, as we segue into Q&A now, is a question for you, Jari. Given the long time frame involved, how does one ensure long-term political commitment to the deep geological repository as a form of waste disposal, and how does one ensure Posiva's that Posiva has the funding that it needs in its role as implementer?
Okay, two different questions. I start with the engagement part. Again, to repeat, so what I said in the presentation, that what has been done well in Finland has been the continuous and regular communication together with media stakeholders, but also the other stakeholders as well, starting from the municipalities and the citizens. And that has been based on trust, openness, transparency, and honesty. Those are the main themes which we have been following over the decades when it comes to our communication. So there has not been any hidden things, no other things which may create certain fears even among people. But based on those 4 things, we have been communicating since early 1980s, and still by today, like I mentioned, the overall attitude among Finnish citizens against nuclear energy as a whole is a very positive thing. The second question, the funding. In Finland, it has arranged following, that we collect funding already in the price of electricity, also for the final disposal. That's it. That's a very crisp and short reply, that how do we fund these operations, and that is to ensure, and that has been then funded for the longer period of time, so that we have in a way financial repository as well in place that grants that there will be money also for the operational phase, that everything proceeds year after year, decade after decade, and there should not be no risk of losing the money to continue the program. So that's the very short version of the reply regarding funding.
Thanks very much, Jari. Another question's come in, and it's connected to this question, but focus on the region. Do you see the possibility in countries in this region, in Southeast Asia, being able to adopt this innovative approach? Earthquakes are a reality in our region, unlike for Finland. So your thoughts, Jari?
All in all, that's of course a very good question. And all in all, based on our experience here in Finland, there is so much in common, regardless of the region, regardless of the bedrock type. One can say that there is even up to 80% of when it comes to the overall deep geological repository program management, starting from the collection of requirements, going to the public engagement, going to the understanding the bedrock types and how that behaves and should be taken into account while planning and constructing the DGR. There is so much common that I'm very confident that we can also support nations in Asian area to initiate the programs and advance them in a professional manner. Because one of the key things that we also communicate on regular basis from the side of Posiva is the huge amount of lessons learned. Because as we are the forerunner in this field, and everything will, as following what Mr. Crossi said, everything will be materialized in Onkalo as we start the production or operation in 2025. We have gained so much lessons learned over the recent decades as the first one in the entire world, that there is so much also to be shared for the rest of the world, that what has gone well, where we have also made certain mistakes, and then we had to choose another path. But we have, on a continuous basis, still proceeded with our program without no showstoppers. Even though, when on a national level, as we all know, the government changes every 4 years, sometimes even in a shorter period of time. But despite of that, the Finnish program has proceeded continuously towards the solution to start the operation.
Thanks very much, Jari. I'm going to turn to Alina now. A couple of questions for you, Alina. The first one here is regarding the current discussions or fight in the EU over the inclusion of nuclear in the taxonomy. Considering the extremely hard positions from some member states, which outcomes, other than a stalemate, would you think are realistic, and how likely do you see that nuclear may eventually be included in the taxonomy? Elena.
Good, excellent question. I think we all like to know the outcome. And I'm not a betting person, but if I were, I'd say nuclear will be included in a taxonomy. It looks like everything is pointing to that. Of course, we have the scientific conclusions that support this. And we also have really more of a majority of countries, and especially with France taking a stronger role, and countries in Eastern Europe, such as Poland, for example, really seeing nuclear as key, to rid its dependence on fossil fuels. In addition to, some concerns about energy security with Russian natural gas, the energy crisis that's going on right now. I think all of that is pushing towards a decision on nuclear to be included. There's been a question of whether nuclear could be classified differently, for example, as a transitional activity. I don't really see that being the case. I can see that being the case with natural gas, but it just doesn't really meet the definition of something that's transitional. So I'm hopeful that it will be included, but of course, none of us can really say for sure.
So just on the comment on there being a stalemate, do you see that it's possible at all that a decision could be made to not take a decision? Or do you think that one way or the other, the EU is going to have to decide?
Well, there has been a promise of a complementary act. So one could say that, that there shouldn't be a stalemate, there should be a decision. Of course, the members of parliament can vote up and down, so they potentially can reject that decision. There is some fear within those who support nuclear energy that it will just get pushed down the line. So even if it's included, but it's included at a later time, it will almost have a different significance than other activities that have been included in April. So that's certainly a concern, but I do think that the EC will make a decision one way or another.
So just to push the delay a little bit more, the point about the delay, apart from politics, Alina, you mentioned when you took us through the various reviews by the Article 31 expert group and Shia's comments that, in some areas, the JRC needed to go back and maybe do a bit more work. Is that likely that the JRC or another technical body may be asked to do further work?
It's a good question that is not mandated or even a possibility at this point. It certainly could be. The members of parliament could decide, or another technical group could decide we need to do a little more work on this. But the directive to date has been that once those scientific reports are completed, which they have been, a decision will be made. That said, the decision was supposed to be made over the summer. That's what we heard in April. And now, the decision is supposed to be made by the end of the year. But I think realistically, no decision will be made until the results of the German elections are complete and those coalitions are formed. So at the end of the day, it's unfortunately still political.
Right. It was just interesting for me when I skimmed through the Shia review, just the abstract of it, because as you say, the report was very long. It was just interesting to note that it didn't include experts, and it says here in long-term high-level radioactive waste treatment and storage technologies. So to that extent, it says here that the comments that they made on that issue were actually quite limited. So I just found that interesting. I wonder if you have any thoughts.
I think that group doesn't really include experts who can make a decision on that point. I think most of the experts in that group are, scientists and other specialties, doctors. For example, people are focused a little more on radiological effects. And then, of course, the Article 31 committee is all focused on radiological effects. So these are not really experts who have the technical know-how to be able to look at, for example, what Posiva is doing and be able to assess that. So I think that may be one of the reasons that they didn't do a deep dive on that issue.
Thanks very much, Alina. If I could pick up on your comment about the current gas crisis, one question that's come in, and let me read it. With the current energy crisis, is there a sense whether countries like China will turn more to nuclear energy or return to coal out of necessity? And the comment here is that the ongoing energy crisis is proving to be an interesting backdrop to the upcoming COP26. So maybe King, Elena, would you like to comment or take this question?
I'm happy to turn it to King, and then I can make some comment as well.
Okay. Before perhaps addressing China, I think this becomes very relevant at the moment, particularly in Europe, particularly around, I think, energy security. I think Alina mentioned that, and increased price and price volatility. So UK already recent UK government have made an announcement to this effect that they intend to use nuclear and renewable, and they have within this week, I think, issued their net zero report of the role of that. And I think Alina perhaps highlighted that recent, I think either this week or last week, 10 European countries have indicated their support for taxonomy, and one of in their open letter mentioned about the recent energy crisis and energy security. I think returning to China have a very significant nuclear build program already, and are planning to do so, and they're committed to net zero by 2060, but their plan, how they're going to do that, is, as far as I'm aware, is not clear. But I think there will be a significant, in my view, further than what they have already planned, a nuclear contribution. But currently, coal is a major electricity generation in China, and obviously price is a significant issue.
Thanks very much.
Maybe,
Elena?
yeah, if I can maybe add to those excellent comments. You know, there's a discussion going on right now on coal repowering or coal repurposing. So taking fossil fuel sites like coal-fired power plants and repowering them with technologies like advanced nuclear technologies. And that discussion is actively going on in China. One of the issues in China has been that most of the power plants today are operating and exist next to the coast and coastal areas. And similar to what Yari was talking about, it's much easier to site anything nuclear at an existing nuclear site. So that is how things have developed in China. Nothing has been sited inland to date. And one of the issues, of course, is access to cooling water. But as China deploys new technologies, and King mentioned the high temperature gas reactor that is about to be operational, those technologies do not need access to water. And they also have higher temperatures, which would potentially allow you to reuse portions of the existing coal sites. So that type of model would really allow China to move beyond what it already has done, which is build a lot of nuclear, but actually be able to phase out some of its coal capacity and replace it with nuclear and perhaps other alternative energy sources as well.
Thank you, Elena. Back to you, Yari. I have a question here on, would you please share your views on the feasibility of a multinational repository over the longer term? Yari.
That is always a very good question. And from our perspective, as I mentioned in my presentation, the Finnish bedrock would be just perfect to offer kind of multinational deep geological repository. Only the Finnish legislation says, made in 1994, that we are not entitled, we are not allowed to neither export nor import rad waste any longer from Finland. But there are certain initiatives ongoing as an example, within Europe as well, among these smaller countries having a fewer amount of NPPs or only say like research reactors or so, that there is also an ongoing initiative to evaluate the opportunity to establish a certain multinational repository somewhere in Europe. So of course, economically speaking, it would make a lot of sense. That's for sure. Then the second thing, there are two main drivers behind of that. Of course, the national legislation, which in Finnish case restricts us to import any rat waste to Finland. Secondly, which probably is the more forceful thing to be remembered, is the public acceptance. Because in this industry, there is a lot of this so-called not in my backyard thinking. So what would be the nation to accept to take some high-level radioactive waste of other nations into its own country? So that's very powerful thing. But yeah, this is my reply. As a final word on this, only a few years ago there was an initiative around this topic ongoing in Australia. They were evaluating and considering that even quite seriously, whether they would start to be this kind of country of taking rat wastes from other countries. But finally, that didn't proceed, that program either.
Thank you, Jari. Time is marching on. I'm going to take one last question and then start to conclude our webinar. Maybe a question for you here, King. And the question goes, given strong public opposition to nuclear power in some states, should governments focus their resources on carbon capture instead, as has been the case in Iceland recently? King.
First of all, I think we need all different type of low carbon technology to solve this very urgent problem. Okay, I will start. Obviously, some countries have different views on nuclear power, and I think Alina highlighted, there are many countries are supportive of nuclear power. Okay, but I'm not an expert on carbon capture, but you will see on one slide, carbon capture technology is not low carbon. So gas, CCUS, still emits about 200 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and coal, CCUS, even more. So if you will try to get to net zero with carbon capture, you need to have direct negative emission technology in order to get to net zero. So I would make that point. And also carbon capture technology is not commercially available at the moment. So obviously some countries are exploring carbon capture technology, and it may at some point become commercially viable, but they're not at this stage. So we need urgent action to use all commercially proven technology now at scale if we're going to meet net zero.
Thanks, King. Alina, Jari, anything you'd like to add before we close this webinar as your closing comments?
Maybe just to add to King's point, we really need all low carbon and zero carbon technologies to meet climate change goals, because we're not just talking about decarbonizing the energy sector, the electricity sector. You cannot electrify some of the hard to abate sectors, such as transportation and buildings. And we're talking now about needing a hydrogen economy, which will require, I think the estimates I've seen is about 600 gigawatts of electricity plus heat. So think about all of the decarbonization goals we need for the energy sector. And then there's 80% of the economy that we still have to tackle. And we need to tackle them through sources like nuclear energy that can produce heat as well as electricity. So we do need carbon capture, we need nuclear, we need advanced geothermal renewables. We really need everything to throw at the climate change problem.
Thanks, Alina. Jari, any
From
thoughts?
yeah, thank you, Dennis. And from my side, just please do not hesitate to follow both Posiva and Posiva Solutions in social media. We do have accounts in YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter, because only in a very few years' time, a lot will happen and covering the entire world. And as we are now communicating this solution of ours to close the last part of entire fuel cycle, i.e. the safe and sustainable final disposal.
Thanks, Jari. So as we draw this session to a close, from the vantage point of a region that's exploring the nuclear option, this discussion, and I want to thank all our speakers, has been very enlightening. Many of the issues we've discussed today are relevant to ASEAN. ASEAN energy ministers have recently committed to intensifying efforts to deploy clean and low carbon technologies as part of longer term planning. And the nexus between nuclear energy and climate change has been drawn in the latest ASEAN Plan of Action for Energy Cooperation, UPAI Phase 2. So this is for our region a developing area, so watch this space. And it leaves me now to just say a very big thank you to all our speakers for their excellent presentations and insights. I have certainly learned a lot. To our audience, apologies to those whose questions we haven't been able to answer, but thank you for enriching our discussion today with your questions, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion. So thank you everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for attending the webinar today. If you're interested to find out more about the work of the CIL Nuclear Law and Policy Team, as well as information on nuclear power-related developments, do follow our dedicated Twitter account at CIL_nuclear. Our podcast series, Nuclear Matters at CIL, is available on the CIL website. This series seeks to share research and contribute to capacity building within Southeast Asia on nuclear law and policy issues of international importance and regional relevance. Have a great day, everyone.